Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the damp, narrow streets of a medieval town. Somewhere in England, maybe France, maybe a little village on the edge of the Holy Roman Empire. It's early morning. The sky is gray and sticky with low clouds, and the air smells faintly of yesterday's stew, horse dung, and wet wool. You're walking alone, your cloak too thin for the cold, and your stomach growling like a beast. You round a corner and spot something magical. A cart piled high with apples. Shiny, red, firm apples. Nobody's watching. Or are they? Welcome to the year 1300. You're about to find out what happens if you steal something, say, one delicious, unguarded apple. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere special, whether it's 3 a.m. in Manila or dusk in Michigan, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your hand hesitates in midair. The market square is empty, or seems to be. A ragged dog scratches at a barrel and a woman slaps her rug out of a top-story window. You glance again at the apple cart. Just one won't be missed, right? Wrong. In 1300, property means survival. If you own a fruit cart, it's not a side hustle, it's your lifeline. And if someone takes from it, even a little, it's not petty. It's a direct attack on your livelihood. So, the punishment for theft, even small theft, can be brutal. Historians still argue whether towns had uniform punishments or if they just made them up as they went. But one thing is certain, medieval people had feelings about theft, especially food theft. The working theory? If you're hungry enough to steal, you're probably poor enough not to matter. As your fingers close around that shiny red apple, a voice booms behind you. Oi, that yours then? You freeze. It's the reeve, a kind of local law enforcer appointed by the lord or elected by the villagers. He's got a crooked staff, a wool tunic 2 shades too short, and a nose that looks like it's been broken at least twice. And worse, he knows your name. Suddenly, you're not just a hungry wanderer. You're a thief. Or close enough to it. He grabs your arm, not hard but firm, and begins marching you toward the village green. People begin to gather, not out of sympathy, but for entertainment. Medieval justice is very public, and often very creative. Now here's the first twist. Before any formal charge, before any judge or lord hears a word, there's a thing called a tithing group. You'll meet them in the next section. But for now, you're standing under a sky that smells of rain, holding a half-eaten apple with a reeve who has no sense of humor, and a village full of eyes on your back. You might still be thinking, hey, it's just an apple. But in 1300, just doesn't exist. People don't lock their doors because they don't have locks. They rely on honor, gossip, and public shame. Steal one apple today, and suddenly people wonder if you're the kind of person who might steal a chicken tomorrow. Or a purse. Or a baby goat. Theft doesn't just mark you, it follows you. And yet, funny enough, you wouldn't be alone. Quirky tidbit. In one 14th century English court roll, a woman named Alice was accused of stealing one blanket, one chicken, and a wheel of cheese in one night. That's either a crime spree or an epic dinner party plan. Either way, she was caught and sentenced to time in the stocks. Plus the cheese was returned, though reportedly nibbled. So yes, you've stolen. But you've also joined a long, colorful line of medieval mischief makers. Some made it out okay, some became legends, and some, well, let's just say they didn't get a second apple. The reeve stops in front of a crooked wooden post. Tall, weathered, with rusty iron rings bolted near the top. You swallow, because whether you're guilty or not, the machinery of medieval justice has already started to turn. You're about to meet your tithing group, the reeve says. They'll decide if this goes to court or ends here with a public scolding. And if you're lucky, just a scolding. You're led down a muddy lane, flanked by low stone cottages, their thatched roofs sagging under years of smoke and weather. A goose hisses as you pass, and a barefoot child with a cabbage in one hand stops chewing to stare at you. You try to walk with dignity, but let's face it, you've been caught red-handed, and your dignity has already rolled off somewhere behind that apple cart. The reeve brings you to a small, timber-framed hall where your tithing group is supposed to meet. This isn't a club or a guild. It's more like a medieval neighborhood accountability squad. If you're a man between the ages of 12 and 60, you're in one. Congratulations! In theory, your tithing group exists to make sure you don't do something stupid, like, say, steal fruit. If you do, the group is supposed to either vouch for you, he's a good lad, probably just hungry, or if they think you're a lost cause, let the law take over. Either way, they get roped into your drama whether they like it or not. Historians still debate whether these tithing groups actually made communities safer or just caused more passive-aggressive bickering. What we do know is that the medieval justice system worked from the bottom up. Before you see a judge, you see your neighbors. Before you face a jury, you face the guy whose pigs keep escaping into your yard. Your tithing group, as it turns out, includes Tom the Miller, who once borrowed your cart and returned it a week later with one wheel mysteriously missing. Walter, who smells like fermented turnips and once challenged you to a wrestling match at a funeral. Osbert, whose main hobby appears to be staring suspiciously at everyone, including rocks. They're all seated on a crooked bench, sipping something warm from wooden mugs, and none of them look thrilled to see you. The reeve states the facts. You were caught mid-morning pilfering an apple. It was witnessed. You had no coin. You offered no excuse. Tom snorts. Walter sighs. Osbert looks like he might declare you guilty on principle. You try to speak. It was just one, and I was... But Walter waves his hand. If we excuse this, then what? Everyone gets a free apple? Technically, yes, that would be kind of lovely. But no one's asking for your opinion. The group debates your fate in low tones, as if discussing whether your cow is worth breeding. You hear snatches like, he's always been shifty, and remember that bread incident? The room smells of musty hay and body heat. A dog under the table farts dramatically. Eventually, Tom, the designated tithing leader, announces they'll allow the case to go to the manorial court. That's not a win, but it's not a loss either. If the group had declared you guilty here and now, you could have been paraded through the village with an apple tied around your neck, followed by children throwing vegetable peels. The court date is set for tomorrow. That gives you one night. One long, uncomfortable, probably cabbage-scented night to stew. As you trudge home, muttering about Osbert's lack of emotional warmth, you pass by the very apple cart you stole from. The vendor, Marion, a widow with strong forearms and a sharper memory, gives you the look. You know the one. It says, "I'll remember this when you come begging for cider next harvest." Quirky tidbit. In some towns, like in parts of medieval Wales, people use singing rhymes to report thefts. Think of it as early musical court summons. Tom took my hen, I'll never lend again. Surprisingly catchy and oddly humiliating. Your mind races. Maybe you'll get off with a warning. Maybe a day in the stocks, or maybe worse. Because punishment isn't just about fairness in this era. It's about performance. And the town loves a good performance. You arrive at your tiny rented loft, a glorified hayloft with a curtain, and collapse onto your straw-stuffed mattress. You're itchy, your pride is in tatters, and you may have started the day with hunger, but now you've got something worse. Anxiety. You stare at the ceiling beams and wonder who first decided that stealing an apple could lead to this much trouble. Historians still argue whether theft was seen more as a sin or a threat to social order, but in practice it was both. You didn't just take food, you disrupted the unspoken agreement that stuff stays where it belongs. When that agreement fails, people panic. And when people panic, they punish. Sleep doesn't come easily that night. You hear the rain begin around midnight, drumming lightly on the roof. Somewhere nearby, a baby cries. Someone coughs. Someone else probably snores. You wonder if they're dreaming of apples. The rain has stopped by the time the first rooster lets out a groggy, judgmental crow. You blink awake, stiff from sleeping in the same position all night, and realize with quiet horror that today is court day. You throw on your coarsest tunic. No point looking flashy when you're about to be called a criminal. And make your way through the muck toward the manorial court, which takes place in the Lord's barn. Yes, the barn. You're not getting high ceilings and carved pillars here. The roof leaks in 3 places, and the benches creak like they're complaining about your very existence. The Lord isn't always present, of course. Sometimes it's his steward or his bailiff or some guy who owns slightly more sheep than the rest of you. This morning, it's Sir Edric's steward, a man named Ralph with unusually long fingers and a suspicious fondness for boiled leeks. He sits behind a makeshift table that wobbles every time someone sneezes. You wait your turn. A pig theft case comes first. Someone accused someone else of deliberately letting a sow wander into their yard and disappear. The pig naturally could not testify. Then a laundry dispute. Someone's shirt went missing from the river rocks. And now there are 2 nearly identical shirts and a lot of finger pointing. These aren't major crimes. But then again, you're not here for major crime either. Just an apple. A round, red, deeply regrettable apple. Finally, your name is called. You step forward, the eyes of your tithing group boring into the back of your head. Walter, of course, is chewing something loudly. Osbert looks like he's mentally composing your obituary. The steward asks for your plea. Guilty or not? You open your mouth. Nothing comes out. Is there even a point? You had the apple. You were mid-bite. Marion saw you. The Reeve saw you. That apple, you suspect, still haunts your breath. Still, you murmur, not guilty, because somewhere in your bones you want to believe you're not a bad person. Just a hungry one. Ralph the steward nods like he's heard this line before. Probably daily. He opens a book with curled pages and writes something down. Your name, the date, the charge. He then asks if there are any witnesses. Marion stands. She's wearing her best apron and radiates the calm fury of a woman who's had to deal with 6 brothers and 3 goats in one household. Her account is clear, firm, and not exaggerated. You almost wish she had lied a bit. Made you sound sneaky. But no, her story is dull, factual, and damning. The steward thanks her and turns to the gathered men of the court. A loose assemblage of villagers, land tenants, and one man who may or may not be asleep in the back. And now comes the best part, the jury. A dozen local men, chosen semi-randomly, all with opinions, axes to grind, and limited patience. Their job is to weigh the case. Sometimes they deliberate, sometimes they don't even pretend to. Historians still argue whether these jury trials were truly fair or just performances wrapped in hay-scented formalities. Whatever the case, it only takes a few minutes. You're found guilty. Now comes the sentencing. You hold your breath. The steward considers. You are a first-time offender. The item was small, and yet theft is theft. You brace yourself for the worst. Stocks, lashes, even a fine you can't afford. Then he speaks. One day in the pillory. You blink. Not the stocks, which hold your feet and make sitting impossible, but the pillory, which holds your neck and wrist upright while you stand there, motionless at the mercy of every tomato-wielding, gossip-starved passerby. Quirky tidbit. In some villages, pillory time came with music. A town fiddler was paid a coin to play while the crowd jeered. Justice with ambiance. How thoughtful. You're escorted to the village green before you can ask any questions. The pillory is already set up. The wood is damp, splintery, and smells like old onions. A few crows sit on the nearby fence like tiny judgmental judges. You kneel. The reeve lowers the top beam. The clunk of the lock echoes too loudly in your ears. Then, quiet. Except for the occasional breeze and Walter who helpfully mutters, "Next time, try a pear." The pillory isn't painful at first, but your shoulders begin to ache. Your legs cramp. Someone throws a bit of bread. Someone else tells a joke at your expense involving apples and rear ends. But mostly, it's boring. Humiliating, yes. But deeply, profoundly boring. Which is the point. You're on display, not just for punishment, but for education. The idea is that everyone walking by today sees your shame and thinks, "I'll never do that." You're not just a thief, you're a lesson. Still, as the sun arcs overhead and the aches deepen, a thought crosses your mind. What happens if someone richer than you had stolen that apple? You'll find out soon. By the time the pillory creaks open and the reeve releases you, your arms are numb, your knees are jelly, and your dignity has officially packed its bags and gone on holiday. You shuffle away, half expecting someone to throw a farewell cabbage. But no, most of the village has lost interest and moved on to more exciting things, like that runaway goat currently terrorizing the bakery. You rub your wrists and think about justice. Not the deep philosophical kind, but the kind that leaves splinters in your skin and a cramp in your spine. You stole an apple and now the whole town knows. But here's a burning question that won't leave your head. What if someone important had done it? Enter Sir Theobald. He's a minor noble. Think, fewer castles, more tax exemptions. He shows up once a week to remind everyone he owns land they can't see and wears fur-lined sleeves even when it's warm. His horse has better shoes than most of the village. A month ago, you watched him accidentally drop a coin into a barrel of dried fish, and then walk off with a smoked eel tucked into his sleeve. No one said a word. The fishmonger even bowed. You begin to notice a pattern. In 1300, status is everything. Peasants answer to reeves. Reeves answer to bailiffs. Bailiffs report to lords. And lords, they answer to the king or the pope, or just their own pockets depending on the century and the region. Historians still debate whether medieval justice systems were corrupt or simply reflective of their rigid hierarchies. But when it comes to theft, one rule seems consistent. The richer you are, the more likely your crime is called a misunderstanding. In many cases, nobles who stole or defrauded were dealt with privately. Fines were paid quietly. Land disputes vanished with a well-placed gift. And when nobles went to court, it wasn't a pillory in the village green. It was a cushioned chair and a whispered apology. You decide to test this theory. You wander into the tavern later that day, hoping for a leftover crust or at least a sympathetic ear. There's Osbert, nursing an ale and glaring at it like it owes him money. You sit beside him, careful not to mention apples. He speaks first. You hear about Marjorie's son? You blink. The one with the broken flute? No, the other one. Caught taking onions from the priory garden. 3 days in the stocks. You stare. 3 days for onions? Osbert nods sagely. Priory onions. Holy onions. Different rules. Another example, you're sensing a trend. Punishment, it turns out, is not about the thing stolen. It's about who you stole from. And who you are. Quirky tidbit. In some records, monasteries kept entire ledgers detailing missing vegetables and kitchen spoons. Theft from a holy site could earn you a fast track to penance or worse. Excommunication, and you thought apples were dangerous. You ask Osbert about Sir Theobald. He grunts. Took 2 goats once. Claim they wandered. They didn't wander. He had stew for a week. You lean closer. And nothing happened? Course not. He gave the abbot a new pair of gloves and it went away. There it is. The secret recipe. Status, connections, and, when necessary, a bribe. You head back out into the afternoon sun, mind buzzing. The idea of fairness in 1300 is quaint. It exists, yes, but more like an idea painted on a shield than something you can hold in your hands. In fact, fines were often preferred to corporal punishment, if you could afford them. For nobles, even large fines were pocket change. For peasants, they meant starvation. If a noble had stolen Marion's apple, she wouldn't have seen a pillory. She'd have seen a coin, maybe two, and that would have been that. But you're Apple Boy now. Forever. Congratulations. You pass by the church, its stone walls gleaming dully in the evening light. A bell rings. The vicar steps out, nods at you and says, with remarkable cheer, "Lesson learned, I hope?" You don't answer. You just walk. Your arms ache. Your pride's still missing, and your stomach somehow is still empty. You wake the next morning to the sound of something sloshing in a bucket. The innkeeper's daughter is scrubbing the corridor outside your room, humming off-key and splashing generous amounts of what you hope is water. Your arms still ache from the pillory, and you feel a bit like a roasted turnip left out too long. Dry, wilted, and vaguely tragic. You're tempted to lie still and mope, but the day won't wait. You dress, stretch, and head outside into a village already alive with clatter and chatter. Chickens are darting around feet, carts are groaning under bundles of herbs and cabbages, and Marion the apple vendor is stacking her produce in suspiciously perfect pyramids. You avoid eye contact. Instead, your feet wander toward the square. It's punishment day. Again. Every few weeks, the village holds public penalties like some grim little festival. Equal parts justice and afternoon entertainment. Today, the stocks and pillories are set up again, but this time, someone else is taking your place. And it's not who you expect. It's Roger, the baker's apprentice, a curly-haired lad with a sweet tooth and exactly zero patience for customers asking dumb questions like, "Is this bread fresh?" His crime, stealing a candle. You stand among the gawkers, blinking in disbelief. A candle. Technically wax, wick, and a little bit of light, but really, it's barely even a snack. The steward appears again, Ralph with the long fingers, reading out the sentence with his usual nasal solemnity. 1 full day in the stocks, and then, gasp, a public confession. This last part is particularly medieval, the humbling ritual. Not only are you punished, you're expected to admit your wrongs in full voice, usually while wearing something absurd like a turnip crown or a placard reading "thief" in shaky script. Roger looks like he might faint. Historians still argue whether these humiliations served as genuine deterrents or just gave people something to gossip about. Some think it fostered order. Others believe it turned justice into farce. One thing's certain, it kept the crowd happy. Roger is dragged into the stocks. His legs are locked in place and his arms flail comically as he tries to balance. A child immediately throws a damp clump of moss at him. Another offers a cabbage leaf. Roger groans. And then, as if it couldn't get worse, the minstrels arrive. Quirky tidbit. In some villages, traveling musicians were hired for punishment days to liven things up. The more dramatic the crime or the funnier the confession, the more elaborate the performance. Today's musical selection? A jaunty tune called The Candleman's Lament, with lyrics that are mostly insults strung together like sausage links. You feel bad for Roger, of course, but also, you're kind of relieved. You're not the scandal of the day anymore. Someone else is. The torch, or candle, has been passed. Still, you can't help noticing something about the crowd. Most of the people laughing are the same ones who nodded gravely when you were in the pillory. Justice here isn't just about right and wrong. It's about showing up for the drama. Everyone plays their part. The criminal, the judge, the crowd, even the goose that always manages to sneak into these events somehow. And then there's the punishment devices themselves. Sturdy, reused, and carefully maintained. The stocks creak in all the right places. The pillory still has your dried apple bits clinging to it, like some unfortunate souvenir. You look around. There's Walter again, arms crossed, smirking. Marion's not far off, leaning on her cart like it's a throne. Osbert is, well, just glowering as usual. You briefly wonder if he's capable of smiling, or if his face is locked that way permanently. The day drags on. Roger's confession is unintelligible, mostly sobs and snot. The steward is unmoved. The crowd is delighted. And the moral of the day seems to be, don't take things that aren't yours, unless you're important, clever, or very lucky. You wander away before sunset, your head full of conflicting thoughts. Is this justice, or theater, or both? The wind picks up as you walk past the stocks one last time. The candle thief's tears are drying. The steward is tallying fines. The goose is honking dramatically at no one in particular. And you're hungry again. You slip away from the green as the sky turns lavender, your stomach reminding you, loudly, that watching punishments doesn't count as a meal. As you wander toward the outer edge of town, you spot a familiar figure hunched over a washtub near a row of tattered linens. It's Agnes, the Lord's washerwoman, her arms deep in the soapy water, and her brow furrowed like she's been asked to solve a riddle using only a bucket and a bar of lard. You offer a cautious wave. She squints at you, then grunts a greeting. "Back from the pillory, are you?" she says without looking up. "Told you not to nick things near the market." Too many eyes. You sit on a mossy stump nearby, grateful for her blunt kindness. She flicks a wet sleeve at you and jerks her head toward the pile of laundry. "Help me wring these, and I'll tell you what happened to my cousin when he stole a goose." It's a fair trade. Your hands are still sore, but gossip is a powerful balm. As you twist linen sheets in tandem, she launches into the tale. Her cousin, one Hamfast, had snuck into a manor kitchen late at night and lifted a fat goose meant for the steward's dinner. He didn't get far. The cook's dog, an aging but enthusiastic hound named Porridge, caught him before he reached the hedges. Punishment? Not the stocks. Not the pillory. No, Hamfast was marched in front of the manor court and ordered to do the laundry for the entire household for a month. By hand, in freezing water. With only a sliver of soap and 2 functioning knuckles. He cried every day. Lost the top layer of skin on both hands. Never stole another goose. You glance down at your red, wrinkled fingers and begin to appreciate your own fate just a little more. Medieval lords had a surprising amount of freedom when it came to dishing out justice on their estates. Some preferred spectacle, pillories, whippings, public ridicule. Others, especially in rural areas, leaned toward the practical. Why waste a strong back when you could use a criminal's guilt to scrub sheets? Historians still argue whether these punishments through labor were a form of mercy or just repackaged exploitation. From where you're sitting, wet sleeves clinging to your arms, you're inclined to believe it's a bit of both. Agnes suddenly grins. Of course, sometimes people just got off with a warning. You raise an eyebrow. Like the blacksmith's wife. Caught stealing her own laundry, thought someone had sold it off. Turned out her husband used it to cover the horse while it dried. "Let me guess," you say. "No punishment?" "Oh no, she got a warning. And he got a saucepan to the face." Medieval justice could be harsh, yes, but it could also be informal. The key factor? Who's in charge? In manor courts, lords or their stewards acted as judge, jury, and occasionally executioner of laundry. That meant decisions varied wildly between villages. In one town, stealing a chicken might land you in the stocks. In another, it might earn you community service, or a public apology, and maybe a new nickname involving feathers. Quirky tidbit. Some manor records show thieves sentenced to act as human scarecrows for a week. They'd stand in fields waving sticks and yelling at birds all day. Terrible for self-esteem. Great for barley. As twilight sets in, Agnes finishes the last sheet and stretches with a groan. "Well, that's enough history for one evening," she mutters, cracking her back like a floorboard. You thank her, wring out your tunic one last time, and make your way back toward the village. The wind smells like wood smoke now, and someone's burning herbs just beyond the ridge. Your stomach growls again, but you walk a little straighter. Because today you learn that punishment in the year 1300 doesn't always mean whips and chains. Sometimes it means cold hands, soggy sleeves, and stories passed down through soap bubbles. The next morning brings a rare beam of sunlight through your loft's cracked wooden shutters. It slices across your face like the hand of a kindly but slightly judgmental nun. You blink, sit up, and briefly marvel that your arms still function. You survived the pillory. You survived helping Agnes with laundry. You've earned some bread, you think, metaphorically and literally. The village is already bustling when you step outside. Smoke curls up from chimneys. The blacksmith's hammer rings like a church bell for horses, and someone is shouting at geese in a language that may or may not be real. You're headed nowhere in particular when a commotion near the center of town catches your ear. A voice, clear, haughty, and oozing confidence, cuts through the chatter. You know that voice. It's Godfrey, a local merchant's son. He's dressed in dyed wool that hasn't yet faded, shoes that actually match, and the kind of smug face that says, "My father pays my fines." Godfrey is surrounded by villagers, including Marion the apple slinger, and he's holding, brace yourself, a basket of pears. You inch closer and overhear Marion accusing him of slipping 2 extra pears into his basket without paying. Gasps ripple through the crowd. Theft? Again? How scandalous. Except Godfrey just laughs. He waves a coin in the air, apologizes with a shrug, and says, "Surely my father will square this." The reeve who tackled you like a runaway sheep now smiles awkwardly and nods. "Course, young master, I'll make a note. A simple miscount." You feel your eyebrows rising on their own, because here it is in broad daylight. What happens when the wealthy steal? Godfrey's punishment is a promise to pay later. No stocks, no pillory, not even a frown. Just a chuckle and a wink and probably a fresh pear for the reeve. You step back and breathe through your nose for 5 long, calming seconds. Historians still argue whether the enforcement of laws was skewed by class bias, but let's be honest. You just watched the scales tip so far, they fell off the table. You decide to investigate further. You wander to the edge of town where a small row of finer homes sits behind low stone fences. Here live the merchants, the retired knights, and the occasional traveling scribe. You find an old friend there, Martha, a weaver's widow who mends silk ribbons for the richer folk, and still owes you 2 boiled eggs from last spring. She's in the garden chopping mint, and she doesn't look surprised when you appear. "I heard," she says without looking up. "You always do. You want to know how the rich get away with it?" You nod. "Fines," she says. "Or favors. Depends on the Lord. If he likes you, he pretends it never happened. If he doesn't, he asks for coin. Turns out wealthy criminals could pay to avoid public humiliation. There were official amercements, a lovely word meaning random fines decided by whoever's in charge. Nobles and merchants paid a fee, usually far less than the value of what they stole or damaged, and walked away with their dignity intact. Quirky tidbit? In 13th century London, a man named Ralph was caught stealing a barrel of eels. He paid 3 pence and was allowed to keep the eels. The victim was compensated with a smile and a handshake. Possibly. Martha leans on her spade. Once the butcher's son knocked over the mayor's cart, smashed it to bits, paid a shilling, and the mayor gave him leftover mutton. So there's no real justice? You ask. There is, she says, but it has a sliding scale. You thank her and wander back toward the village green, your mind spinning. You begin to see the system for what it is. Not broken exactly, but built with levers, some heavier than others. If you have coin, you lift yourself out of trouble. If not, you're the one being lifted into the stocks, into the pillory, into the middle of a song you didn't ask for. That night, you lie awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind whistle through the cracks. You think of Godfrey's basket of pears, of Agnes's cousin in the laundry, of the barrel of eels, and of your apple. Half eaten, fully regretted. And you begin to understand something strange. In the year 1300, stealing is only partly about the thing you took. Mostly it's about who you are when you take it. Morning again? This one brings a thick fog that clings to your boots and makes even the geese seem mysterious. You head toward the edge of the market, where the thieves' stalls are whispered to exist. Not marked, of course, but known. They're part of every town, really. A cluster of crates under an awning that always looks like it's about to collapse. Sellers whose goods are lightly used, previously loved, or definitely not recently removed from someone's barn. This is where the stolen things go, and where conveniently no one asks too many questions. You arrive and immediately notice the vibe is different. A young man is selling knives, none matching, all family heirlooms. A woman nearby has 4 wool cloaks, 2 of which still bear faded embroidered initials. You browse slowly, pretending to be interested in a pewter tankard that may or may not have a bite mark on the rim. The stall keeper, a lanky fellow with a lazy eye and a hat that might have once belonged to a bishop, smiles too wide. Looking for something special? Maybe, you say, but I don't want trouble. He snorts. Then don't look too closely. This is the unspoken rule of the medieval black market. Don't ask, don't tell, and definitely don't mention where that necklace came from if it still smells like monastery incense. Historians still argue whether black markets were considered criminal hubs or just survival networks. In truth, they were both. People needed things, things went missing, and in towns without proper shops, secondhand meant suspiciously acquired, and the best part? Selling stolen goods often came with less risk than stealing them. That's because punishment usually fell hardest on the thief, not the seller. Why? Because proving who originally stole something was messy. You could always claim, "Oh, I bought it fair and square," from a stranger who vanished into the mist. The legal term was receiving stolen goods, but proving it required witnesses. And in a time when most people couldn't even describe their neighbor's face, let alone track an item's ownership, it was easier to turn a blind eye. You drift between stalls. There's a ring that looks eerily like the one Osbert's wife lost last week. A set of iron keys. A small, curved dagger engraved with a coat of arms that definitely doesn't belong to the man currently haggling over its price. You pause at a stall selling books, actual books, not scrolls. You pick one up and thumb through it. It's in Latin, upside-down Latin. Probably stolen from a monastery where someone will spend the next 6 months wondering where the Psalms went. Quirky tidbit? Some records show that monks would curse their books with inscriptions like, "If anyone takes this book, may he die in pain, be eaten by worms, and be cast into hell." Strong words. Probably not effective. You set the book down. A voice murmurs at your shoulder. You see anything that shouldn't be here? It's Elric, one of the town's reeves in training. A man whose idea of stealth is wearing gray instead of brown. You glance sideways at him. Almost everything here shouldn't be here. He shrugs. That's not what I asked. He moves along the stalls, not stopping anyone, not confiscating anything. Just watching. That's how it works. The authorities know this place exists. They know it functions. They might even benefit from it. Some reeves and bailiffs take a cut. Some traders pay in favors. Everyone keeps things quiet, and justice skips a beat. You realize then that theft in 1300 doesn't always look like you clutching an apple. Sometimes it's someone buying a stolen brooch and pretending it's a gift. Sometimes it's a merchant losing inventory that mysteriously reappears with a markup. And sometimes it's justice itself looking the other way because the village needs somewhere to get cheap cloaks. You nod at Elric and move on. On the way back toward the center of town, you pass Marion's apple cart. She's got new apples, shiny, red, almost glowing. She sees you and for once doesn't scowl. Instead, she tosses you one. You catch it reflexively, heart suddenly racing. "It's bruised," she says. "Won't sell." You nod, mumble thanks, and walk away. You don't bite into it. Not yet, because for the first time you realize, in 1300, everything has a price, even kindness, and even stolen goods. You head home with the bruised apple tucked carefully in your cloak pocket, like it's contraband or treasure, depending on who's asking. The streets are muddy again, and the fog's lifting, revealing a sky so pale it might be blushing from embarrassment. Or exhaustion. You relate. Then you hear it. A clatter of hooves, a shout, the low clang of iron. You turn the corner and freeze. There, at the edge of the square, stands a tall wooden scaffold, freshly assembled, its beams rough and dark with sap. And beside it, adjusting a length of rope and muttering to himself, is a man in a blackened tunic, his sleeves rolled up, his boots caked in dried something you hope is mud. This is the executioner. And no, he doesn't live here. He's a wandering one, the medieval version of a freelancer, moving from village to village like a morbid tradesman. The locals call him the Smiler, though it's hard to say whether that's irony or rumor, because no one's ever seen him actually smile. You edge closer, staying behind a clump of nosy schoolchildren. He doesn't seem in a hurry, this man with the scarred face and the massive blade slung casually across his back. He yawns, he stretches. He sharpens the axe with a slow rhythm like he's whittling a lullaby. Today, someone's going to die. And you didn't even know it was that kind of crime. You spot the prisoner a few feet away, bound at the wrists, lips chapped, knees shaking. He's a horse thief, caught 2 towns over, dragged here because our Lord happens to own the horse. Horse theft, you remember, is serious. In fact, horse stealing is often treated as a capital crime, on par with murder or treason, not because horses are beloved pets, but because they're wealth. Steal a man's horse in 1300, and you might as well have burned his fields and kidnapped his eldest daughter. Historians still argue whether executions for theft were common, or just theatrical exceptions. But here and now, in this square, it feels very real. You glance at the villagers. Some whisper, some weep. A few nod grimly like they've seen this before. And probably they have. Quirky tidbit. Executioners were often feared and needed in equal measure. No one wanted to be one. Most had inherited the job or were offered it as a last resort. They were paid in coin, clothing, and sometimes the leftover belongings of the condemned. Yes, really. You could make a whole outfit from one good hanging day. The Smiler finishes sharpening, tests the edge of his axe on his thumb, without drawing blood, which somehow feels worse, and nods to the steward. A priest steps forward. The condemned man confesses, trembling, barely audible over the rustling leaves. You want to look away. You don't. Because this too is justice in 1300. Not the kind of petty theft that earns jeers and cabbages, but the full-force spectacle version. Public. Merciless. Designed to remind every peasant with an idea of rebellion that death has a schedule. The execution, when it comes, is quick. Quicker than you expect. One moment the man is muttering. The next, the axe falls. No music, no speech. Just the thud of inevitability. The crowd exhales. The Smiler wipes the blade on a cloth that's seen better days and begins to pack up. He'll be gone by morning, off to the next village, where someone's probably brewing trouble near a stable. You stand there, shivering, not from cold, but from the sharp sense that justice has teeth, and they don't always bite evenly. Later, you hear stories about the thief, how he was desperate, how the horse belonged to a cruel lord, how maybe he meant to return it. Doesn't matter now. Justice in 1300 doesn't do nuance well. Especially not when horses are involved. You walk home slowly. The sky darkens. The apple in your pocket feels heavier now. Not just fruit, a memory, a warning. You think of the Smiler, of his blank expression, of the way he never looked at the man's face. And for the first time, you understand this truth. Some thieves disappear, others become examples. And if you're lucky, you're neither. Night falls with little ceremony, just a slow fade from dusty gold to soot-stained gray. You sit in the loft again, legs tucked beneath you, chewing the bruised apple Marion gave you. It's tart and mealy, and yet somehow perfect. You stare at the wooden beams above and wonder, what if you'd run into a church instead of the pillory? Because believe it or not, in the year 1300, if you'd managed to slip past the reeve and dash inside the stone walls of the village church, you could have claimed something remarkable. Sanctuary. The idea was simple, at least on parchment. If you fled to a consecrated church and touched the altar, you were protected for 40 days. That's 40 days where no one could drag you out, not the reeve, not the steward, not even the Lord. You'd still be a criminal, but you were a criminal with holy carpet privileges. The logic? Churches were God's domain, not man's. So if you stepped inside and prayed, while also probably hiding behind a pew, you were entering divine bureaucracy. The law had to wait. Historians still argue whether sanctuary was a loophole for justice or a sacred form of mercy. But in practice, it became a sort of legal timeout. You couldn't stay forever. After the 40 days, you had two choices: stand trial or confess and agree to permanent exile. That meant walking to a port, literally walking, with a cross in hand and a sign saying abjurer, while townsfolk shouted goodbyes that ranged from safe travels to don't come back. You remember a tale Agnes once told about Giles the chimney sweep, who stole a silver goblet from a monastery and ran straight into the nave of St. Cuthbert's before anyone could grab him. He claimed sanctuary, spent 40 days eating crusts and hearing daily sermons from the same monk who once gave him a black eye during choir practice. When the 40 days were up, Giles abjured the realm and was last seen boarding a ship to Flanders, or falling off it. The records disagree. You picture yourself trying the same thing, racing through the square, the apple still in your hand, bursting through the church doors, gasping for breath, and slamming your palm on the altar like some kind of holy touchdown. And then, waiting. Church sanctuary wasn't cozy. It was more like a controlled panic. You slept on stone, begged food from the townsfolk, many of whom thought you deserved to starve, and tried not to cough too loudly during prayers. But it beat the stocks, or worse. And sanctuary wasn't always granted. If the priest didn't like you or thought you were gaming the system, he could make your life difficult. Churches in some regions began locking their doors at night to avoid the whole situation. Others charged fees, because apparently even mercy has administrative costs. Quirky tidbit. In one French town, the church had a designated sanctuary bell you could ring as you fled. It warned everyone that you'd made it inside and dared anyone to try dragging you out. Like medieval base in a game of tag. You wonder, how many people were saved this way? How many confessed, abjured, vanished? And how many were caught just before they got there? You shake your head. It's too late now, of course. Your bruised apple episode didn't earn sanctuary. But it's comforting somehow to know that in this cold and often brutal world, there was a space carved out for second chances, even if it came with splinters and sermons. Outside, you hear the church bell ring. Vespers. You picture someone inside sweeping the stone floor, lighting a tallow candle, whispering prayers for mercy. Maybe they're whispering one for you. By sunrise, you're already halfway out of town. Not running exactly. Just walking fast enough that if someone yelled your name, you could pretend not to hear. You've decided to visit the forest. Not just any forest, but the stretch of woods beyond the last miller's fence, where the trees are older than the village and gossip travels only in the chirps of wrens and the occasional suspicious rustle. You've never had much reason to go here before, but now, you're curious about the people who did. Because in 1300, if you were convicted of theft and didn't fancy the pillory or the lash or the very final sound of an axe, you could do something bold, something desperate. You could flee. Not just from justice, but from society altogether. The woods were full of them, outlaws. Not Robin Hood types, though one or two might have tried the whole green tights thing. These were everyday folks. Runaway servants, debt dodgers, petty thieves, people who had nothing left to lose but their freedom. and maybe a few fingers to frostbite. You duck beneath a low branch and follow a game trail deeper into the underbrush. The sounds of the village fade. You're not quite sure what you expect to find. A campfire? A rogue with a twinkle in his eye and a stolen loaf of bread? Instead, you find silence and a ring of stones, charred in the center. Someone has been here. Historians still debate how many of these so-called outlaws survived for long. Forest life wasn't a romantic romp. It meant sleeping under wet leaves, eating whatever didn't bite first, and dodging patrols that were highly motivated by the bounty on your head. Yes, bounties. In some villages, catching an outlaw could get you free ale, a warm winter coat, or, if the thief was notorious, a pardon for your own crimes. Very medieval karma. And if you were declared an outlaw by a court, things got even worse. Outlawry meant that you weren't just in trouble. You were no longer under the protection of the law. Legally speaking, anyone could harm you. You were no longer a person, just a problem. Quirky tidbit. In some towns, after outlawry was declared, the town crier would bang a drum and announce that the criminal was no longer of the realm. Which sounds dramatic, but mostly meant don't expect anyone to miss you. You find a fallen log and sit for a while, listening to the wind sift through pine. You wonder if there's someone nearby, watching, hidden, cautious. You wonder what they think of the law you've just escaped. And then you spot it. A bit of cloth, snagged on a bush, torn and faded, but clearly dyed once. Blue, like the kind used for servant uniforms. Whoever left it wasn't a noble. You imagine their story. Maybe they stole a loaf of bread. Maybe they took a coin meant for their master. Maybe, like you, they reached for something small and paid dearly. Now they live here. Beyond borders. Beyond mercy. You head back toward the village slowly, the shadows stretching longer behind you. At the edge of the forest, you pass a hollow tree that smells of smoke and damp wool. Inside, nothing. Or someone just very good at hiding. Back in town, no one notices your absence. People rarely do when your name's been tied to petty crime. You're now part of the background, like the broken fence by the well or the rooster who crows at bedtime. But as you settle back into your loft, the forest lingers in your mind. Out there, people live without roofs or rules. They sleep on moss, they eat squirrels. They carry knives and never walk near the church. And while they may be forgotten by the law, they've created something else. A life beyond punishment. Hard, yes. Dangerous, absolutely, but theirs. And sometimes that's more than what the law offers. You don't plan to get involved, really. But that evening, as you pass the baker's shop, windows fogged, door ajar, warm air smelling of flour and exhaustion, you hear shouting. Not angry shouting exactly. More like competitive shouting. You peek in and see two women facing off over a loaf of rye. "She always gets the freshest one," one hisses. "That's because I ask nicely," the other snaps. A third voice, smaller, warbly, chimes in from the shadows. "You both stole my turn." The baker, red-faced and clearly regretting every career decision, holds up his hands like a priest at a goat wrestling match. And then someone says it. "I heard she stole her own neighbor's eggs last week." Gasps, a few dramatic ohs. You step away before the situation escalates into airborne sourdough. But it sticks with you. How easily rumors function as law. In 1300, there is no police force, no CCTV, no official investigators with magnifying glasses and dramatic monologues. The justice system is communal, built not just on tithing groups and manorial courts, but on gossip. If 3 people say you're a thief and the reeve doesn't like your face, that's often enough. And once your name starts circling the rumor drain, it's almost impossible to fish it back out. Historians still argue whether this informal justice empowered communities or punished the powerless. But records show entire legal outcomes shaped by who whispered loudest at market. Take the case of Alwyn the Chandler, who was accused of stealing wax from the monastery storehouse. No one saw it, But someone heard his wife talking about a new candle mold, and someone else saw his son with waxy fingers, and suddenly, trial. Alwyn protested, claimed innocence, said the wax was from last year, didn't matter. The rumor had mass, gravity, it pulled everyone in. He was fined a month's wages and lost his stall near the church forever. All for something no one ever proved. You think back to your own apple. How many people actually saw you take it? One, maybe two? But everyone knows about it now. Even the goose, probably. You head toward the well to draw some water and hear snippets from two older women nearby. And then he tried to sell the apple. Can you imagine? He bid it and still tried to get a coin for it. You blink. You never tried to sell anything. But here it is. The story evolving in real time. Growing legs and twirling in circles like a badly balanced puppet. You could correct them. You could shout the truth, but you don't. Because in 1300, shouting the truth is a good way to be labeled loud. And loud people attract fines. Quirky tidbit? In some towns, scolds, mostly women labeled as troublesome talkers, could be punished with a scold's bridle, an iron muzzle with a tongue plate. It's as awful as it sounds and says more about the legal system than any scroll in Latin. You head back to your loft, wondering how long your apple theft will echo in the market's memory. A week? A season? Forever? There's no official sentence for being remembered as a thief. No pillory, no stocks. But somehow it lasts longer. Because medieval justice doesn't end with the steward's gavel. It lives in the mouths of people with nothing better to do than retell the tale, wrongly. You lie awake staring at the rafters again, listening to the wind slip through the shutters. Someone sneezes in a nearby loft. A dog barks once and falls silent. You think of Alwyn, of his waxy-fingered son, of rye bread turned into accusations, and you realize something oddly chilling. In 1300, your punishment doesn't end when the sentence does. It ends when people stop talking, which, let's be honest, could be never. You start noticing them more now that you're looking. The petty crimes, the quiet infractions, the little thefts no one talks about until they do. A child tucking an extra crust into their pocket when they think the baker isn't looking. A man slipping a chicken egg from a neighbor's coop and leaving behind a pebble as if that makes it a fair trade. A girl pretending not to notice that the spindle she borrowed hasn't been returned for 3 weeks. And then there's the boy with the chicken. He's no older than 10, skinny as a fence rail and twice as twitchy. You spot him near the edge of the square, cradling a scrawny bird under his cloak like it's a secret. He keeps looking over his shoulder like the sky might tattle. You know that look. Turns out the bird belongs to Edric the Tanner, a man known for two things: making decent leather and having zero tolerance for nonsense. By sunset, the whole town knows. The boy is dragged before the manorial steward. No pillory this time, no stocks. Instead, his entire family, parents, siblings, even a confused-looking grandmother, is brought to the barn court to answer for his actions. Because in 1300, punishment doesn't always land on the guilty. Sometimes it spreads. Collective responsibility isn't just a theory, it's policy. Especially when it comes to children. If you're underage, your parents are expected to keep you honest. If you slip, they pay the price. Literally. The steward lists the charges: petty theft, unlawful poultry possession, disturbing the peace. The boy shakes, his mother pleads. His father stares at the floor like it owes him an apology. Edric wants a fine, half a month's wages. The family doesn't have it. They offer goods: a sack of barley, a hand-woven blanket, an old iron pot. It's not enough. So instead, the steward issues a different punishment: 3 weeks' labor, shared among the family. Repairing the Lord's fence. Cleaning out the grain store. Helping the reeve count turnips, which is somehow both boring and deeply humiliating. You watch as the boy is led away, still clutching the chicken. It squawks once, then goes quiet. He's allowed to keep it, though now it's not really his. It's part of the price. You feel something stir in your chest, not outrage exactly. Just that quiet ache you get when the world shows you its rules and you realize you were hoping for different ones. Historians still debate whether collective punishment created tighter families or just perpetuated fear, but in this moment you're seeing its weight firsthand. Quirky tidbit? In some towns, if a child stole and their family couldn't pay, they'd be rehomed, placed in another household as a servant until their debt was considered paid. Basically, congratulations, your crime got you a new job. Forever. You pass the family later that evening. They're gathered outside their cottage, tired and silent. The mother is scraping mud from her shoes with a stick. The father is fixing a broken strap on a spade. The boy is feeding the chicken. He looks up at you, not angry, not sad. Just older than he did this morning. You nod. Because what else can you do? Back in your loft, the wind rattles the shutters again. You think of all the petty things people take. A fruit, a cloth, a bird. None of it evil, all of it survival-shaped. You remember something Agnes once muttered? In a world built for lords, sometimes the only fair thing to take is what you can carry. You roll over in the straw, listening to the quiet. Tomorrow, the family will start their sentence. No pillory, no songs. Just blisters and bruises and long days in the sun. Because in 1300, stealing isn't just a crime. Sometimes it's a family affair. The next morning, the village is abuzz with an old excitement. Trial by ordeal. You don't hear it from an official. You hear it from Walter, who corners you near the well with a gob of porridge still clinging to his beard. It's finally happening, he wheezes. They're boiling the water now. Your eyebrows lift automatically. You mean someone asked for it? Begged for it, Walter says, grinning like a man who enjoys his breakfast and a good scalding. Says he's innocent. You follow the trickle of townsfolk moving toward the churchyard. It's always the churchyard. Justice and piety tend to share real estate. Near the steps, a large black kettle hangs suspended over a flame. Beneath it, a fire crackles. Around it, whispers bloom like mold. You make your way to the edge of the crowd and spot the accused. Harwin, a short, broad-shouldered cooper who looks like he could punch a barrel into shape. He's accused of stealing a silver clasp from the merchant's visiting daughter. She claims she left it on her cloak. He says he never saw it. And now, here he is, choosing what most people would run from. Trial by ordeal. This particular flavor is called ordeal by hot water. The accused plunges a hand into boiling water to retrieve a small stone or ring placed at the bottom. Then the hand is wrapped, and after 3 days the bandages are removed. If the wound has festered, guilty. If it's clean, miraculously innocent. It's not science, it's faith. Or fear, or theater. Or, more likely, all three. Historians still argue whether these ordeals were meant as sincere divine tests or just a way to terrify people into confession. Either way, it wasn't justice. It was a performance, with blisters. Quirky tidbit. In some places, trial by cold water was used instead. The accused was tossed into a river. If they floated, they were guilty, rejected by the purifying water. If they sank, they were innocent. Of course, you then had to rescue the innocent before they stopped being innocent. And alive. Back at the churchyard, the priest steps forward, solemn as always. He blesses the water because God likes his punishment sterile, apparently. Then Harwin steps up. He doesn't flinch. He doesn't tremble. He plunges his hand into the water, lets out one bark of pain, and pulls out the stone. A wet slap against the ground. A smell like pork left too long in the sun. Then he falls to his knees, gasping. The crowd lets out a collective breath. You feel it swirl around you, equal parts horror and awe. The priest wraps the hand. The reeve marks the time. 3 days. Everyone will wait. You catch Marion nearby, arms folded. Do you think he did it? You ask. She shrugs. Does it matter? And there it is. Because the truth rarely survives ordeals like these. What matters is perception. What matters is that the community watched, nodded, and walked away saying, justice was done. But you know the truth. The clasp is probably still hidden in some hayloft, or halfway to another town in a merchant's pocket. Maybe it never even existed. Still, Harwin chose the boiling pot. Maybe he believed in God. Maybe he believed in his innocence. Or maybe, just maybe, he believed it was better to burn for a moment than be judged by a village full of whispers. You return to your loft late, the image of steam still clinging to your thoughts. Harwin's face, the red flesh of his hand, the priest's calm prayer. You wonder how many others have tried it. You wonder how many healed, how many confessed, how many simply disappeared. You roll onto your back, straw crunching beneath you. In the quiet, it strikes you. In 1300, the truth doesn't always matter, but wounds? Those are easy to measure. 3 days later, the bandages come off. The entire town gathers because of course they do. Who wouldn't want to watch a man's future hinge on the cleanliness of his blisters? You wedge yourself between Walter and a pig cart to get a decent view. The priest stands ready, holding a small knife to cut away the bindings. Harwin sits on a stool, jaw clenched, his left arm outstretched like an offering to some invisible god of inflammation. The crowd holds its collective breath. Snip. Snip. The linen peels away, layer by layer, revealing pink, raw skin. Blistered, yes, but not blackened. No yellow pus, no angry streaks. Just burned flesh that's healing. Slowly but cleanly. The priest tilts his head, eyes narrowed. He murmurs to the steward. A brief, whispered debate. And then the verdict, innocent. A collective exhale. Murmurs ripple through the crowd. Relief, surprise, disappointment. A few people nod like they suspected it all along. Others scowl, unsure what to do with their previously firm opinions. Harwin exhales too. He doesn't smile, he just stands, slowly, nods once to no one in particular, and limps away, cradling his hand like it's a relic. You don't follow him, you just stand there, in the fading light, thinking about everything you've seen. An apple that ruined your week, a merchant's son who walked free, a boy punished for a chicken, a man who boiled his hand to prove a negative. And you start to realize just how strange and tender and fragile justice is in the year 1300. It's not a thing you can hold. It's not a rule written in stone. It's a mood, a rumor, a bruise, a performance with costumes and spectators and sometimes fire. Historians still debate whether medieval law was fundamentally unfair or just terribly practical. But you now know the truth. It's exhausting. Living in fear of the next mistake, the next accusation, the next song the minstrels compose about your poor choices. And yet, as you walk through the village that evening, something has changed. People nod at you. Marion doesn't scowl. Osbert glowers only a little. You're not forgiven. But you're no longer the story. Someone else will take that role soon. Maybe the tanner's cousin. Maybe the steward's dog. Doesn't matter, it always shifts. You end your day on a fence post watching the sky go gold. The geese honk in the distance. Someone laughs, and it's not at you. You pull the last bite of that old bruised apple from your pocket. It's soft, overripe, still sweet. You take a bite and smile, because in the year 1300, you're still here. And that's no small thing. Now take a deep breath. You've walked the muddy lanes, stood in the stocks, felt the burn of injustice and the ache of community memory. You've learned how an apple could spiral into public shame, how a child's mistake could burden a family, how gossip could weigh heavier than evidence. You've watched justice happen in barns, beside boiling pots, and beneath a hanging rope. You've seen how silence protects, how coins excuse, how labor and humiliation are meted out in strange little rituals we call fairness. But also, you've seen kindness. A bruised apple passed quietly. A tithing man who didn't shout. A washerwoman with a story and a half-clean bucket. These too are part of the world. Let the images soften now. The reeve fades into the background. The pillory stands empty. The crowd disperses, their voices drifting into whispers you no longer need to hear. The wind cools. The shutters stop rattling. And now, in the quiet, you can rest. Because even if the world of 1300 is sharp and splintered, tonight you are wrapped in stories. Strange, sleepy, and very, very old. Let them settle around you. Let the past stay where it is. You did well, traveler. You made it through. Good night.